My name is Dwight Hutchison, and I am the author of several books and articles about the Star of Bethlehem. And this is the 6th video in a series about the star. And today we're going to be exploring the chronology of the star, trying to date about when these events happened according to the heavens and also according to history, archaeology, that type of thing. The Star of Bethlehem, or as I like to say, the Messiah star, appeared about the time of Jesus' conception and birth. However, for centuries there have been problems with specifically dating the birth of Jesus. The year and the month of his birth remain a subject of debate, and ancient dates are not necessarily easy to calculate. The present calendar terms BC and AD were only adopted many centuries after the birth of Jesus, and some errors were made in the date calculation process. Therefore, we now have the odd situation of indicating Christ's birth in the years BC, several years before the AD period, instead of doing it in the AD or the 1 AD period. For about 1500 years, most scholars and Christian leaders followed the ideas of the early church fathers, believing that Jesus was born sometime during 3 BC or 2 BC. Some early Christian authors indicated that Jesus was born in the 41st or the 42nd year of the reign of Augustus Caesar, that is his consulships, etc., before he became first citizen. It is certain that Jesus was born sometime before the death of Herod the Great, but there is some debate also about when Herod died. According to the Jewish writer Josephus, Herod's death was preceded by an eclipse of the moon. The two primary candidates for this event are a partial eclipse of the moon in March of 4 BC, or the total eclipse of the moon in January of 1 BC. For various reasons, which go well beyond the central focus of these videos, many Bibles, commentaries, and godly preachers in the last 4 centuries have used a 4 BC date for the death of Herod the Great. This dating was first proposed by a Polish monk named Laurentius Suslyga in 1605. And Suslyga's dating was founded on a series of logical assumptions, but in recent decades, some of his ideas have been seriously called into question by archaeologists and other scholars. A 4 BC date for the death of Herod does not solve all the chronological problems, and it may also create several other serious historical, factual, and biblical difficulties. Some of our sources of information apparently contain some errors as well, which could also lead one to false conclusions. If one makes different assumptions about the periods of Herod's death and the birth of Jesus, then the chronology takes on a whole different aspect. Each dating scheme concerning Herod's death is heavily influenced by one's initial assumptions. In recent times, several scholars have sought to affirm the beginning of Herod's reign in the later part of 39 BC and his death in early 1 BC. Jesus would have been born in late 3 BC or early 2 BC, at least 1 year preceding Herod's death. And this is in line with the perspective of the early church fathers. I assume a late January 1 BC date for Herod's death, and using the Jewish accession year dating system, that is from fall to fall, from Tishri to Tishri, as suggested by Steinman and Young, one finds that Herod could have died in January of 1 BC in his 37th year. I explain these dating problems in detail in my book, The Lion Led the Way. Andrew Steinman and Roger Young have recently written several in-depth papers showing that there are significant problems with the assumed 4 BC date for Herod's death that has been adopted by so many during the last 4 centuries. And they have more thoroughly developed ideas along the line of the early church fathers. Therefore, one could look for Matthew's famous star in possibly 3 or 2 BC. And indeed, the sky was filled with symbolic royal signs during the years 3 and 2 BC. The December 25th date for the birth of Jesus has a complicated history, and it is often assumed and widely proclaimed that the date was established to replace a pagan celebration. However, on close examination, this is most likely not the case. Indications that Jesus was born in December or January are found in the writings of the church fathers. Theophilus, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, Hippolytus of Rome, and others like Eusebius, Gregory of Nazianzus, Chrysostom, Epiphanius, and St. Augustine also believe this. Christians in the early centuries of the church often thought that Jesus was conceived in Mary's womb at Passover and that he died on the same day several decades later. Often they thought that he was conceived about March 25th. 9 months later, that makes December 25th. In the Catholic Church, the Anglican, Lutheran, and Eastern Orthodox churches, the Feast of the Annunciation is still celebrated at Easter, that is Passover, in the spring, commemorating Gabriel's announcement to Mary that she would give birth to the Messiah. A conception in late winter or early spring gives a birth date in December or January. One early church tradition indicates that as a young child, Jesus stood beside his seated mother when the wise men made their visit. A 1-year-old child can stand, especially if he can hold on to objects or people, like a young boy would have been able to do. Apparently, the family had been established in Bethlehem for about 1 year after the birth, before the visit of the wise men and their flight to Egypt. Joseph even desired to return to Bethlehem after being in Egypt, but he was afraid to go back there due to Herod's son Archelaus being in power. Joseph only took his family to Nazareth after having a specific dream. The census probably had something to do with the 25th year anniversary of Augustus being named the first citizen of Rome. This was Augustus' official title as emperor, and in February of 2 BC, during the celebrations of Augustus being named first citizen, he was given another honorific title, the Father of the Nation. And apparently a census linked to a pledge of allegiance to the emperor was organized having to do with that date. This census did not involve taxes, as is wrongly indicated in some Bible translations. Luke's Greek text only mentions a census. It does not mention taxation specifically. At least one ancient writer identifies this pledge of allegiance with the census mentioned by Luke. And I should also say here that a census in wintertime would have been desirable in much of the Roman Empire. Agricultural societies do not appreciate having interruptions during the seasons of heavy activity. And there's not a whole lot going down on the farm during the winter months. So it's a good moment to have a census, actually. We know as well that the winters in Israel, and especially in Judea and southern Israel, are not extremely difficult. They're not like winters in northern Europe or in northern Canada, somewhere like that. And so it is very possible that the shepherds would have been out in the fields during the winter time, and in fact there are evidences of this in our present day, and I'll put up at the end of the video some indications of that. Several people have said, oh, it's not possible that the shepherds could have been out in the fields at that time. You know, Abraham had flocks, vast flocks, but he did not have barns to put his flocks in. The flocks were outside all year long. And I think that a lot of people forget this, that we're not dealing with a society that has sheep that are inside for a big part of the winter time. We're dealing with societies where the sheep are outside for most of the year. Some modern Messianic Jews have made efforts to develop a supposedly more Jewish approach to Jesus' birth. They do this by rejecting the traditional dates for Christmas and proposing that Jesus was born in September sometimes during one of the Jewish festivals or a holy day. And on the surface, the idea can be attractive, and others even talk about a birth in the springtime. However, there are good reasons to question this approach. First, one cannot find a more Jewish date than Passover for Jesus' conception. And many Messianic Jews do not realize that their traditional December birth date is connected specifically to a Passover conception date. So in order to get more Jewish, they're actually rejecting something which is extremely Jewish. Second, a significant problem is that there are no ancient church traditions connecting the birth of Jesus with the fall festivals and appointed times, or with the birth of Jesus in the springtime. There is a tradition connecting John the Baptist's conception with the fall, but not Jesus' birth. Another problem with the birth during the Feast of Tabernacles, as is proposed by some, is that according to the Torah, all Jewish men were supposed to be in Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles from the 15th to the 22nd of the month of Tishri. And that would have been easy for Joseph, because the land of his ancestors was just down in Bethlehem, only 5 miles away, 7-8 kilometers away from Jerusalem. But to participate in the Roman census, some men from the northern tribes, who were living in Jerusalem perhaps, would have had to make the journey from the capital back to northern Israel to return to the land of their ancestors, where that the Jews did their censuses. However, such a trip would have been impossible in the middle of a Jewish celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem because the men were required to be in Jerusalem for the festival. So this actually doesn't work very well when one actually gets down to the mechanics of it. Because for the festival, the men have to be in Jerusalem, but for the census, at least the way that the Jews were running censuses, the men would have had to have been in their ancestral homeland, like Joseph did when he went to Bethlehem. Some have made chronological assumptions also and calculations based on Zechariah's temple service that you can find there in the book of Luke. And there is speculation about the pregnancies of Elizabeth and Mary. However, no one knows if both Elizabeth and or Mary became pregnant immediately after Gabriel gave his messages. In Luke 1:20, Gabriel simply says that Elizabeth's pregnancy and the birth of John would be in their proper time. Gabriel did not say that Elizabeth would undoubtedly be pregnant immediately after that Zechariah went back home. And Elizabeth's pregnancy may have followed the announcement by 1, 2, 3, or perhaps even 6 months. We have no idea. So to insist on a certain date based on the temple service times when Zechariah would have been serving cannot function properly because we don't know when the women became pregnant or when Elizabeth became pregnant. In the next videos, we will begin exploring the specific events in the skies in 3 and 2 BC, which seem to point to the coming of a truly great king.